Okay, let me get off of the making a list of myths for a little while and talk about another thing that happened to us that people often do talk about, don't talk about. We monotonically steadily grew from one person to 2 to 3 people and eventually grew to 39 people. And then in the course of less than a year, we shrunk back down to 9 people. And at that point, of those 9, which I was one, 2 of us were not getting paid at all, and the other ones were getting paid. So we were really in a dire situation. And those of us who remained came to work with very little work actually to do, and we sat down for a series of days around a table and talked very frankly about what we were doing right and what we were doing wrong. And we changed a lot of things about the company. That was when we realized that we couldn't survive just selling satellite systems, that we had to have other products. Because there are some times when customers want satellite systems, other times when they don't. And but you've got salary, money coming into the company is like air. It's not that you can just say, oh, there'll be plenty of air in 6 months. You need air every minute of the day. So you need a mix of products so that you can always be selling something, even if it's not what you'd like to be selling. And the very first thing we went into was components. And later we went into communication services. And between that, to me, was the tripod that the company stood on. That tripod was very shaky at the beginning, and we had a lot of people who were against, as I was, diffusing our efforts into other areas. But it was always relevant. We weren't just selling any old components. We were selling components that we ourselves had developed for our own use in small satellites. They were small satellite components. We didn't develop any old type of communications capability. We developed communications capability based on the radio technologies that we were using, the communications protocols that we were using, and in architectures that were compatible with small satellites. So we also created a management structure. That was the point at which we said, we can't have a totally flat organization where nobody has a boss. In fact, people wanted to have at least some sort of a boss who they could talk to about what was the next thing I was going to be doing, how much budget do I have to do this, just the very basic things. And the final thing that we learned was it wasn't going back to our past of 1990 or 91 when we first got to 9 people. When you think, okay, I'm starting completely over again from 0, it's so discouraging. But in fact, we were a company of 9 people that had the experience of having been to 39. And as we got back in gear and implemented the ideas that we have, those were ideas that we didn't have the first time we passed the 9-person mark. It was a whole different startup the second time around. It was the company version 2. And that company version 2 had a lot better experience. And I don't just mean growth, because it wasn't all about growth. It was about, A, are we turning out product? Are we demonstrating? Are we getting people on board with this idea of small satellites? And B, are we enjoying it? It's not worth, to me, it was not worth proving a technical point if the trade-off was that our people were suffering and I was suffering. It had to be positive from the work experience point of view, you can call it the lifestyle point of view, and also positive that we were doing our mission as a company and promoting this idea of small satellites. And part of that realization was the idea of profit, something that we had been actually against, because it was not our goal to make money for nobody, to say it that way. Our goal was to do something important in the world and to have fun doing it, and to prove that those two things actually can coexist. And profit to us was just a polluting factor. If we started worrying about making money, then were we in it for the money or were we in it for the technological thing that we wanted to do? And I developed kind of a thesis about that. If you look around in the world, very few things make a profit, right? The Eiffel Tower is a nice symbol of France, but it doesn't make a profit, right? To state something obvious. The history of the airline industry in America is that they have not made a profit. Over the historical amount of money invested, the costs of running that airline, all of the buried costs of capital, of infrastructure, and so on, compared to ticket revenues, it's not a winning proposition. That doesn't mean that we don't need airlines in America or in the world. It just means that it's worth it beyond the profit. Or to take something totally obvious, the highway system does not make a profit. America has all these roads. Every country has roads. Most of those roads, nobody pays to use them. So that they're all money-losing propositions. Every road loses money, loses a lot of money, loses, $100,000 a kilometer to $1 million a kilometer. It's a huge, not just a small amount of money, a huge, but we accept that. We don't think roads are bad because they don't make money. So turning a profit, to me, was not where the company should be at. And the surprising thing about those days of introspection of how are we going to get ourselves back up on our feet again? What's version 2.0 of Aeroastro going to be? The root cause of our problem, we decided, was the failure to make a profit. And that was a difficult thing for me to admit because I felt that profit was a polluting and not a helping factor. But when you don't have profit, the problem is that you can't do anything. You can't give employees money to do training. You can't build a component for the first time without a customer to prove that it's a good thing. You can't do R&D. You can't even afford to pay a person to go out and go to all the conferences and show Aeroastro, hey, we exist and we're doing cool things. So the company had become the classic tree falling in a forest. We were doing incredible things. We had built radios, sun sensors, earth sensors, torque coils, power control boards, structures, deployable mechanisms, and nobody even knew that these things were out there. And so instead of selling them, we were encouraging people to build their own, or to think that nothing like that even existed. So we said we were out there trying to change the world, and we were changing it technically, but we weren't changing it at all really because we weren't communicating. We didn't have the profit to go to meetings and just give papers. And we decided in that rebuilding of the company that we had to make a profit. Doesn't mean that I gave it to myself to buy a fancy car. It means that we could choose then to invest it, however we wanted to invest it, in advertising, in giving papers, in travel, in building projects in products through R&D projects and so on. And the result of that was that the company did better. So this was a case where the conventional wisdom was actually true. And I have to admit, since I was so nasty about saying that everything that Silicon Valley thinks about a startup was wrong, in this case they were right, maybe for the wrong reason, but they were right. Living without profit. I did not consider myself a capitalist, but now I am. What I'm anti is the misuse of profit. If the profit just goes to make certain people in the company or certain investors wealthy while the company starves, that's not a good long-term strategy for anybody. So profit didn't become the dirty word. The dirty word doesn't exist anymore. What exists instead is the obligation to be smart about making sure you make a profit and then making sure you use the profit in an intelligent way. Okay, back to things that are not true. There's also a very popular myth that if you're truly an entrepreneur, you're going to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You're going to have no social life, no family life. You're going to ruin your health, blah, blah, blah. But you're going to build this great empire. And as you could probably tell from the tone of my talk up till now, I was not buying into that. I was a serious athlete doing a lot of different sports. I had a lot of outside interests. I was married. I had a family. I didn't want to, give everything up just so. In fact, to me, that was the antithesis of what we stood for. Small satellites, the trick in a way is this is not magic that nobody but us can do. In fact, it's easy. Even we can do it. And without killing ourselves to do it. And that small satellite should be fun and easy. It shouldn't be impossible and only a few superheroes in the world can actually do it. And to say, oh, we managed to do this because the 20 of us or whatever our number was stayed up and we didn't sleep for 2 years. I mean, that just says to people, okay, these zealots can do it, but other than that, nobody's doing this, right? So I would say our experience was, yes, it's a lot of work, right, to build a satellite and to build a small company. But the people who are really capable in the world have many options for jobs. They're not going to pick a job that requires them to give up everything in life in order to do one cool technical thing. Or they'll do it for a year and then they'll leave. And that creates turnover. And then every year you've got to retrain new people. You need to treat people well. I like treating people well, but I managed to realize very early on that it wasn't just a nice thing to do, it was the only way to sensibly run a company. You have to balance, the desire to, let's say, be economically efficient with the desire to sustain yourself for a very long time. And so in a way you learn from another Chinese proverb to go slowly but to go a long distance, instead of sprinting and then kind of being exhausted when you reach the... And the one thing I will say about Aeroastro, and that investors said about us later, outstanding thing that other people noticed when they visited Aeroastro was the uniform quality of the people. Aeroastro was a place that attracted incredible people. Every single person you met was an outstanding person. And they weren't there because they worked 24 hours a day. They were there because we were doing exciting things and commensurate with having some sort of a reasonable salary and some sort of a meaningful life outside of work. That led, though, to the criticism that we were a lifestyle company. A lifestyle company is a pejorative term used to say, this CEO didn't start the company to make a profit. He started the company so that he could semi-retire and have a nice sandbox to play in. And that was a criticism that was leveled at us because we didn't buy into the Silicon Valley, you're going to work 7 days a week, you're going to not have a life, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It was just the opposite. We had a nice place to work, we had a kitchen, we encouraged people to bring food into the office. Every Friday afternoon, the company paid for pizza, and one of the employees made a presentation to talk about what they were doing at work or something they were doing outside of work that they thought other people would be interested in. And in general, we tried to create a decent work life in the company. And the logic of that was, A, it's not worth it, to give up years and years of your life to suffer. But B, people work better when they're happy, when they know each other, when they get to see what other people are doing around them, when everybody isn't just an anonymous face and you only know the 3 people in your cubicle. And there was a famous quotation from Yogi Berra that said, when you reach a fork in the road, take it. What exactly does that mean? Well, to me it meant you can do both things. One doesn't exclude the other. Being efficient, working hard, does not exclude being a human being. And I think thinking that that's a trade-off immediately leads to a disaster, because either you feel that you have to indulge or you feel that you have to be a slave driver. And I didn't want either of those 2 roles, to tell you the truth. It doesn't work like that. So that is a total myth. And the idea of forcing people to live within certain rules teaches them that they're babies and that without rules they'll do the wrong thing. So this idea of a lifestyle company where people have personal freedom is not some sort of a soft way to be in semi-retirement. It's a smart way for you to live, and a smart way. Smart people will choose the job that's best for them. And when they see that the boss is intelligent and that the company has a mentality of this type, which supports each person as being a mature individual, that created the magic environment of all these really sharp and hardworking people who did what we did. And a lot of the things we did were not that easy to do. So that's the myth of the lifestyle company. Somewhat associated with that is the myth of the mission company. A lot of criticism that I also got was that I didn't care about making money. I cared about the mission. What was the mission? The mission was to prove that there was a different way to do space. And therefore, thinking like a guidance and control engineer, if my optimization was around showing a technical demonstration of a concept, which would be to build a family of spacecraft that flew successfully and did important things and dispelled the myth that small satellites were toys and that they were unreliable, which was always said about us and which is a complete misunderstanding of the technological underpinnings of small satellites. In fact, the history of small satellites is that they're much more reliable than large space systems. But that was our mission, to demonstrate that this was real. And therefore, the conclusion was Rick isn't interested in paying salary, paying investors a return on investment, in having a financially sound operation. And I got interested in that because what I found was that many great companies are mission companies. The first one of those that I read about by accident, totally by accident, was the story of Hilton Hotels. Because Hilton Hotels was started by a person who traveled for business and was totally, what he wanted out of a hotel was a quiet, clean place where he could get a good night's sleep so that the next morning he could go out on the road and do whatever his job was out on the road. And this very fundamental thing was largely not available. And eventually he dedicated his life to creating that, to creating a chain of hotels that were reliably of a certain quality that the business traveler could find in every city that he would need to go to, have a reliably uniform quality of standard, get the night's sleep in, and go on with your life. Seems like a very simple thing, but it didn't exist, and one person dedicated. So Hilton Hotels, not profitable, not successful, because it was a mission company and not organized for profit. Henry Ford had a dream, not of just making money. I think he did want to make money, but his dream was that cars were not very similar to us. We're not just something that the richest elements of society could afford and everybody else could walk or use a horse. He had a dream that everyone should be able to afford a car, and he proved it. And that was the early mission of the Ford company. And very similar to that, Apple Computers, which was founded essentially by Steve Jobs. And what was the mission of Apple Computers? It was the computer for the rest of us, because the stereotype of computers was that they were large, complex machines that worked in obscure ways that only a computer scientist would really understand, used for very sophisticated things like scientific things and corporate accounting systems and so on. Very similar to the way we think of satellites. Satellites are very complex things that only rocket scientists really understand, but it doesn't matter because they're only used by people to do very sophisticated things in space, like look at gamma ray bursts or something like that. So the average person just dismisses the whole field as being A, impossible, and B, irrelevant anyway. Why would you participate in that? So Apple Computers built an industry around the idea that computers should be in the hands of everyone, and that was a mission, right? So then look at corporations that have no mission, right? Or that construct a mission later because the mission statement is part of your annual report that you give to shareholders. And okay, it's easy to criticize, but I look at General Motors that way. When I was a kid, General Motors was by far the biggest car company in the world, I think bigger than all the other car companies combined. And now it's really a niche player in the global car business. Because what is GM associated with? What's their expertise? What do they do that nobody else can do? And they lost that. I think maybe at one time they might have had it. But on the other hand, you look at Toyota. What does Toyota really stand for as a company? And for many, many years, they ran their advertisements, Toyota every day. What does that mean? It means that Toyota is not for people who want to go 0 to 60 in 6 seconds. It means that Toyota is there for people who just want the car to start in the morning, to provide them reliable, safe transportation, get them to work. Most people are not focused on their car. They're focused on getting their kids to school, getting themselves to the office, doing their shopping, and when they have vacation, having a comfortable road car that isn't going to break down on them in the middle of, Monument Valley or something like that. And Toyota became famous for being economically reasonable priced quality cars that are extremely reliable. And that is a mission, right? And the Japanese quality revolution of the 70s was a mission to prove that cars could be reliable, durable, and so on, which the American car companies simply did not participate in. So this having a mission, to me, organizes everything else you do in the day, is not a burden on the company that distracts you from making money. It's the fundamental thing that is the company. And without it, you can have all the trappings, all the accounting systems, all the efficiency, all the time cards, everything you want to keep track of how many hours every employee is putting in front of his computer. Or if you really want to be extreme about how many keystrokes, who cares? If you're doing the wrong thing, it's all wasted motion.